China is on the warpath. Again. Where to find piles of cash in Hong Kong? And what do kimchi and the moon have in common? That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This week's China News Headlines. China is preparing for war. Again. Okay, the Communist Party says they're preparing for war a lot. When you're an authoritarian communist regime, it's what you do. On November 30th, the Politburo Standing Committee met. Those are the 7 most powerful old guys in the Chinese Communist Party. And according to state-run Xinhua, Xi Jinping talked about military regulations. He emphasized preparing for war by integrating political work into all links of combat effectiveness. Basically, Xi Jinping wants good communist soldiers who listen to the party. And by the party, he means himself. Sounds like a recipe for a top-notch military with lots of combat effectiveness. Now, over to Hong Kong, which the Communist Party has successfully conquered without ever firing a shot, unless you include tear gas. So much tear gas. You may remember Hong Kong activist and friend of the show, Joshua Wong. I've interviewed him before, including last year in June, right after he got out of jail for his involvement in the Umbrella Movement. He's now been sentenced, again, to 13.5 months in jail. This will be his 4th time in prison. Fellow activists Ivan Lam and Agnes Chow were also sentenced to slightly shorter jail terms of 7 months and 10 months. They were sentenced for organizing and inciting others to attend this protest at Hong Kong Police Headquarters last June. I was there that day. So were Shelley and Matt. In fact, we did a live stream at that protest. And you know what that means. It's time for us to go back to Hong Kong and bust these 3 out of prison. They'll never see Shelley coming. And while we're at it, we might swing by Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam's house. U.S. sanctions have left her without a bank account, which means she's getting her big fat salary in cash. Wow, she earns more than the President of the United States. And she's keeping her $600,000 salary in piles of cash at home. I wonder where she got the idea. Hong Kong pro-democracy media tycoon Jimmy Lai has been arrested for alleged fraud. Lai owns the pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily. Lai was arrested and Apple Daily's offices were raided over the summer under the National Security Law. Lai's current arrest is officially unrelated. He and 2 other company executives stand accused of using their offices for purposes not allowed in the building lease. Specifically, they are accused of subletting part of their office space. And while the 2 other executives were released on bail, Lai was denied bail. So he has to remain in prison until the next court hearing in April. Lai was denied bail as the judge ruled he may abscond or re-offend. Good thing Hong Kong is keeping criminals like Jimmy Lai off the streets. What if he re-offends by subletting his office space? What a danger to society. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is urging local leaders to speak the truth. As if they don't. Li was talking to local leaders at an online economic forum. His point was, if for some reason you weren't reporting accurate economic data, we can't make good policies. Sure, the Communist Party has incentivized local leaders to lie about economic data for decades. But now, local leaders should tell the truth. Of course, if there is a huge economic crisis in China, this might be a way for the top leaders of the Communist Party to blame all the problems on local officials. If they don't tell the truth now, they're lying. And if they do tell the truth now, it means they were lying before. It's never the central government's fault, you see. It's always those bad local officials. Speaking of telling the truth, China has declared victory over extreme poverty, according to state-run media.
Chinese state media rushed to declare victory for a nationwide anti-poverty campaign. The statement shocked Chinese netizens, with many posting videos online to illustrate what life looks like in some of the impoverished counties as of today.
They are so poor that they don't have enough food or clothing. There are also people who became poor after a major illness. Some even committed suicide when they caught an illness. There are many such cases, but Chinese media will not report these tragedies.
Sounds like someone should tell Chinese state-run media to speak the truth. Or maybe they just speak their truth. And after the break, guess what Chinese pro-democracy forces are saying about U.S. politics? Welcome back. According to the New York Times, pro-democracy advocates in Asia say Trump is better when it comes to China. They believe that Mr. Biden, like former President Barack Obama, will pursue accommodation rather than confrontation in the face of China's assertive moves. They quote a Hong Kong entrepreneur who said, "Biden is president and it's like having Xi Jinping sitting in the White House. He wants to coexist with China, and whoever coexists with the CCP loses." Earlier this week, we did an episode on what Biden's advisors think about China. And it looks like many of them are in favor of a China reset. At least, Biden has now finally said what he'll do about Trump's tariffs on China. He won't immediately remove them. Sounds like the kind of firm resolve we need to take on the Chinese Communist Party. The Trump administration has tightened visa rules for Chinese Communist Party members. The new policy, which took immediate effect, limits the maximum duration of travel visas for party members and their families to 1 month. Travel visas for party members will also be limited to a single entry rather than multiple entries. Before, party members could apply for visitor visas that would last for 10 years and be good for multiple entries, just like all other Chinese citizens. And in a sign that standing up to the Chinese Communist Party is still a bipartisan issue, the U.S. Congress has passed a bill that could delist Chinese stocks from U.S. markets. I talked about this issue in detail in a previous episode. Chinese companies were allowed to list on U.S. stock markets even if they didn't follow U.S. laws. That's not going to be the case anymore if Trump signs the bill. Something tells me that he's going to sign it. Taiwan. It's under constant threat of a Chinese military invasion. And Taiwan citizens are also under threat if they travel to China. Chinese courts just sentenced a Taiwanese professor to 4 years in jail. He went missing in China 2 years ago and has now been charged with espionage. China is not a safe place for anyone, really. More and more countries are joining what Secretary of State Mike Pompeo calls the 5G clean network, networks that don't use Chinese equipment. Pompeo announced that 3 more countries have joined: Brazil, Ecuador, and the Dominican Republic. That brings the total number of countries to 53, more than a quarter of the world. This comes as the FCC reaffirmed that Chinese telecom ZTE is a national security threat. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian posted on Twitter this doctored image showing an Australian soldier slitting the throat of a child. Senator Marco Rubio wrote a letter to the Twitter CEO questioning why Twitter allowed it. He wrote, "It appears Twitter made an intentional decision not to remove the tweet or even issue a warning label. We know your company has the ability to move rapidly, as it frequently issued warning labels on tweets of prominent Americans during the election, sometimes within minutes of a tweet being sent." Someone's salty. He also asked 4 questions to the Twitter CEO. We'll see if Twitter's CEO responds, hopefully in 280 characters or less. However, Chinese social media app WeChat has no problem blocking messages from foreign officials. WeChat has blocked a post from the Prime Minister of Australia responding to the whole doctored image post by Zhao Lijian. I somehow don't think the Communist Party understands irony. Like I said in our previous episode on this issue, the Australian Prime Minister demanded an apology for the doctored image. That's not going to happen. And now we add to the list of things that have belonged to China since ancient times. First up, the moon. A Chinese spacecraft is bringing moon rocks back to Earth. I'm sure they'll sell like hotcakes on Taobao. And a little closer to home, it turns out that kimchi, the delicious Korean food staple, is not Korean at all. No, it's been a part of China since ancient times. That claim originally came from my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times. It said China had led the development of an international standard for pao cai. Pao cai are fermented vegetables. And in the Global Times article, they essentially include kimchi when talking about pao cai. And after angry reactions from South Koreans, the Global Times doubled down, publishing photos of Chinese pao cai, including a photo of a woman from China's Korean ethnic minority group tasting kimchi, but calling it pao cai. The Global Times certainly knows how to troll. But there's at least one great culinary tradition that I know the Communist Party won't try to lay claim to. The McRib. Pork machine stamped to look like it has bones and smothered in a tangy barbecue sauce. That is indisputably American. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a member of the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army, a fan who supports the show on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Today's question comes from Logan. I see that China Unscripted has hit the 100,000 subscriber mark. Will you be showing off that silver play button soon? Ah, good eye, Logan. Yes, our China Unscripted podcast has finally topped 100,000 subscribers, putting it in the top 2% of all YouTube channels. And that means sooner or later, YouTube should be sending us a nice plaque like this one. They only ship those out a few times a year though, so we're still waiting. But we've left a spot on the wall for it, as you can see. So when we get it, you'll know. Thanks for your question, Logan. And thanks, I assume, for subscribing to the podcast. And if you're watching and you aren't subscribed to the podcast, what are you waiting for? It's great. Matt and Shelley join me for fascinating interviews with leading China experts. And yes, Shelley is real. China Unscripted is available with video on YouTube and audio only on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and our website. Check it out. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Unscripted. America Uncovered. China Uncensored. We have too many shows.